Welcome to the Catholic Sobriety Podcast, the go-to resource for women seeking to have a deeper understanding of the role alcohol plays in their lives. Women who are looking to drink less or not at all for any reason. I am your host, Christy Walker. I'm a wife, mom, and a joy-filled Catholic, and I am the Catholic Sobriety Coach, and I am so glad you're here. So my guest today is Stephanie Mattrey. She is a Catholic wife to her husband, Jack, and mother to 3 daughters. She's devout in her faith, and her struggles with addiction and bulimia have inspired her to help others. She is also an acupuncturist and serves her community in Western Massachusetts. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here today and sharing this information that I know is going to be so helpful and hopeful to many of my listeners.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so can you share a bit about your background and how it influenced your struggle with bulimia?
Sure. So I was born and raised in a town called Bethlehem, in Pennsylvania. And when I was little, I actually thought that Jesus was born in my town, and nobody told me that was, it was funny. They thought it was funny until I was like 10 and I was like, wait a minute, there's another Bethlehem. So I always tell that story.
That's so cute.
And yeah, it's like a little town. They call it the Christmas City, an hour north of Philadelphia. And I had a pretty, normal upbringing. From the outside looking in, we were a nice nuclear family, 2 parents, and I had an older sister who was 2 years older than I was. We were very close when we were very young, up until maybe age 6 or 7. And I didn't really realize this was happening. I think kids don't realize that their families could be abnormal because it's all they know. And as I've gone through years and years of therapy, I've noticed, oh my gosh, that's not normal. So my sister had a lot of trouble with my existence. She didn't like that I was born from the get-go. She actually tried to kill me when I was an infant, when she was 2. My parents kind of covered that up and called that an accident for many years. She pushed me off of a countertop. I was like in an infant seat, and she pushed me off, and I landed on my head. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that my dad was finally like, no, that was on purpose. So that was kind of the first incident. And as I grew up, we were close, but she had me at arm's length at all times. And so she would sort of distort my reality. She would twist things and sort of gaslight me from a young age about anything, sort of. She just controlled everything that I knew. And it got me to question my own self and my own sense of reality and my own trust in myself, until I was spiraling in this confusion. I felt like everything was always my fault. I didn't know. I was always confused. I didn't know really what was going on. She would frame me for a lot of things. I would get in trouble for things that she did, like, a lot. And she just, I don't know, she just distorted my reality is the best way I can describe that without going into immense detail. So I grew up like that. And then when I turned about 14, she completely stopped talking to me and did not tell me why. She just completely stopped. We were still living in the same house. I was a competitive swimmer, so I wasn't home that often. She was a dancer and into theater, so she wasn't home that often. And then eventually she went off to college, and I really basically never heard from her again. We'd see each other at a few family functions. But when I was 11 was when I started to really try to deal with this sense of being out of control by myself. I didn't know how to articulate it, so I couldn't really ask for help. I didn't know that things felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but all I knew was that I felt way out of control. Food was always something there that I turned to because it doesn't talk back. It's right there. It's free. It's in the pantry. I'm from an Italian family. My mother was constantly baking and cooking, and I had anything that I wanted at my fingertips. And so at a young age, I finally realized that the only amount of control that I could muster in my life was what I put into my mouth. And so when I was 11, I stopped eating. I started throwing my lunches away at school. I really, no one was really monitoring that, like my breakfasts. So I wouldn't really eat those. Again, I was a swimmer. So I would come home after dinner, after everyone had eaten, and I was alone at a table with a plate, but I didn't eat that. So nobody like, you know, figured that out. And eventually um, I lost a ton of weight, and instead of concern, I got praise for it from everybody. So I just thought that, okay, I'm doing something right. Like even though I felt like I was dying, I was exhausted, I lost my period, like all of the things and I was 11. So I was still just this young kid, adolescent. Um, and eventually uh, my mom figured it out. And actually, ironically, my sister brought it to her attention. And my mom took me to this nutritionist. And back then, nutritionists really were not all of them were trained in eating disorders. So they didn't really know how to address them. And this woman was she just was very blunt in the way that she talked to me. Mind you, at this point, I'm about 12 and a half, maybe 13. And she said, well, if you don't start eating now, you're never going to be able to have kids. You're going to ruin your fertility. And since I was a really little kid, all I wanted to do was be a mother. That was my life goal. And so, of course, that's all she needed to say to me. And it scared me. And she also made me eat extra things after dinner. Like she prescribed these extra things that I was supposed to eat. And my mom was there, so she like made sure that I did it. But what's difficult with anorexia is that the actual act of eating is like extremely severely scary. So I didn't have any monitoring in that. And I immediately felt like out of control again. So that was when the bulimia started to resurface or not resurface, to begin. I remember I was having a conversation. I had heard about the word bulimia and I asked my mom what it was. And she said, oh, well, that's when people make themselves throw up. You don't want to do that. And like, that's all I needed to hear. You don't need to do that. And so after school, I would be home alone. My parents both worked. My sister was out, and I kind of got good practice at binging and purging. And that became my drug from the age of 13 on. And I used it as a drug because it was a way for me to numb my feelings of this out of control confusion that I had going on at home. It was my secret that I could like keep to myself and not tell anyone about. It was always there for me. It was like this frenemy, right? Like it was a friend, but also an enemy. And of course, at that age, I didn't know that the only goal of this disease is that it wants to kill me. And that's what it started to do slowly as my life went on. So as I grew up, I kind of kept this in my back pocket, and I was purging daily. I wasn't binging as much, but I was definitely purging, both physically and exercise. I exercised a ton. I was still an athlete. I played water polo in college. I studied psychology, and I took a class on eating disorders because I thought it would be an easy A since I knew what I was doing, and I got a C because I like didn't think I needed to study. And it's like that kind of arrogance, I think, that the young mind can experience. So my senior year of college, I met my husband, and at the very end of my college career, I was studying psychology. I really loved it, but I didn't want to pursue that. I wanted something different. And an acupuncturist came into one of my classes and gave some needling, and I just was like, what is this? This is amazing. So my husband and I checked it out and found a school in California. And of course, just like happy go lucky, we got married. 2 weeks later, we moved across the country, like, because that's a normal, healthy thing to do. Later in life, I learned in addiction, that's called geographical curing. We try to start over. We try to look for a different place to be and to reinvent ourselves. Maybe I'll be better this time. And I was not. I just was a functional bulimic. So I was able to function and still engage in these behaviors, even behind my husband's back. He knew I struggled with it, but not as severely as I did. And then I got pregnant with my first daughter. I was 27. And I remember telling this baby that I promise I will never purge again. I will not do this to you. And I stopped. I never did. I stopped, but I continued to eat, and the food became more and more this drug for me, and this coping. So I had the baby. I was still in school. I was knee deep in clinical stuff and rotations around LA and stress. It was stressful. And then I thought it was nice to have another baby. So I had another baby, took the state board and passed those, had a little bit of a practice in LA before we decided, hey, we're 3,000 miles away from family and we've got 2 kids. Let's move. So we just moved with a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old back east, settled in Massachusetts, had a third baby. Still, I'm not purging, but I'm eating. I'm eating and eating and eating. And then finally, I was searching for a church to go to. We hadn't gone to church in forever. I'm a convert, so I wasn't Catholic yet at this point. And I thought to myself, well, I think we should probably raise the kids in a church. Let's take them to church. So I found this Episcopal church, and this priest was there, this woman, and she had written a book called Holy Hunger. And I read the book, and it was my story. I couldn't believe it. And in the book, she talked about 12-step recovery as like what she used to get herself help. So I, picked up a 5,000-pound phone and called her, much to my chagrin. And I said, I need to talk to you. This is my story. And I sat down and wept in her office, and she just held me and taught me how to start with 12 steps and go to a meeting and get a sponsor and all of that stuff. And so I did, and it was wonderful. But I wasn't taking it seriously as an addiction. I really wasn't. So it only worked for a certain amount of time because I wasn't fully immersed in the program. Because that happened, I became just ashamed that I couldn't do it. So I left that program and just spiraled back into eating, not purging, had a third baby in Massachusetts, and then had tried to figure out, little ways of part-time work and then mothering and all this stuff, and still very stressful. And then finally, I entered another 12-step program, and I found recovery, but my sponsor was very much like my sister. And I didn't know that, but she, like, now looking back, like, she spoke to me the same way, manipulated me in the same ways. And so I kind of had this flashback of emotions with her, and ended up, my bulimia then resurfaced. And as we say in the rooms, that our disease is never dormant. It's always doing push-ups in the parking lot. And so it progresses as we age, whether we engage in it or not. And that is exactly what it did, because it picked up where it left off. And it was really scary how severe it was. I couldn't believe, purging 50 times a day. It was just like time consuming and exhausting and like life threatening, really. And so this went on for maybe a year before I realized I need to go to treatment. And I did. I went to a lovely treatment facility in Florida that is actually 12-step based for eating, which is rare to find for a treatment center for eating disorders. And it was wonderful. And I was able to stabilize, and I stayed in my program, my 12-step program, and I am still in that to this day. And it's a roller coaster. I think not every day is a cookie cutter, but to live in recovery is much better than to live in my disease. So that's where I am today. And I have a private practice here, and I'm helping all kinds of people that have PTSD and addiction and all of that. So.
Right now, alcohol feels like the only way that you can cope with the stress of motherhood, social pressures, and maybe even fit in with your group of friends. But you're starting to realize that it's leaving you feeling ashamed, disconnected, and maybe even out of control. Imagine if you could wake up each morning feeling at peace and proud of the choices that you're making and free from the pressure to drink, whether that's at home or in social settings. And that, my friend, is where my 5-day sacred sobriety kickstart comes in. By the end of the 5 days, you will feel more peaceful and in control because you will have more clarity and confidence around your decisions to take it or leave it. You're also going to learn how to manage your mind in a way that is aligned with your faith. You will learn how to speak truth over yourself, and that will help you root out what's keeping you stuck. So check out my 5-day sacred sobriety kickstart and gain the clarity you need to make the decision to take alcohol or leave it from a place of peace. You can visit my website, thecatholicsobrietycoach.com. I have a pop-up there, or just go to my show notes.
Wow, there's so much to your story, Stephanie. And, I think a lot of times people that do have eating disorders, they don't realize that a 12-step program, that there are those
Mhm.
types of programs out there that can help them. Because a lot of times we just associate 12-step programs with substance abuse or
Right.
addiction to, pornography or something like that. They don't realize how helpful it can be for really any disordered attachment that we
Mhm.
have. And that's what you had because it was, and we don't necessarily think of like bulimia and anorexia as a drug, but it is because you're
Yeah.
misusing it and you're using it to try to cope, to numb, to whatever it is. And yeah, it can get just really out of control.
And at some point it becomes not a choice. The addiction is
Right.
a real illness. And so like there are changes in the brain. Dopamine is firing and everything, or it's low and I just need a hit. It's literally a
Right.
hit. And so at some point, because I used to really beat myself up about why am I still doing this? I can't believe this. Like it is such a real disease that afflicts
Mhm.
the mind and it's compulsive and it's obsessive. And so to kind of break that cycle takes a lot of work and support. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, and you suffered a lot of trauma at the hands of your sister. And
yeah.
many of us, that's kind of how we get into our addiction, right? Is just because
Hmm.
we've suffered some kind of trauma. And obviously, it's different for everyone. And then it kind of causes us to seek or to fill up that emptiness or numb ourselves or whatever it is. So you talked about getting help through a 12-step program. What are some other ways that you work to overcome this very severe trauma that you experienced?
Yeah. So I had a massive conversion experience in 2021. It was about, it was May. I'll never forget. It was May 1st was the first day. Um, my my lifelong best friend from age 5, who is still my best friend now, she recommended this Bible study, and she was Catholic. And I was like, oh, okay. She recommended it in 2020. And I was like, that's nice, whatever. And then she did again in 2021. And something, God's grace, fell on me and at just the right moment and got me to say, huh, well, I wonder what that's about. Let me just check it out. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to change me. I'll look at it. And boy, that was such a false statement. It floored me, and it just made me fall in love with Christ so much. And I never thought that I would even say that. I just couldn't stop. So I woke up in the morning every day at 5 in the morning and sat at my desk in my bedroom with my little desk light, and my husband's asleep in the bed. I'm like doing this Bible study before the kids wake up every single morning. And then one day he said, what are you doing and like at the desk every morning? Like, are you taking a class and I don't know about it? And I got my Bible and I hugged it and I started weeping to him. I was like, I think I want to be Catholic. And so he was like, oh my gosh. And he was raised Catholic, but kind of fell away. So the whole experience, I converted and my kids came with me willingly. They wanted to, and he reverted, and it revamped our entire faith. And so all that to say that I fell in love with Christ in adoration. I went to adoration and I learned what it means to be gazed at, to let Jesus gaze at me. We can go and sit and gaze at him. That's easy. We can go look and just be, but to take our mess and allow him to look at us and hold us takes some work. And I had never encountered him like that before. So I have to say that the Eucharist is really the medicine that I found, in addition to my 12-step work, but the Eucharist is where I've found the healing from this horrible disease. Yeah. And then everything Catholic, like all of the prayers and just writing my life to put Christ first and making sure that I keep that every day. That's how I have to live one day at a time.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Out of curiosity, what's the Bible study that you did?
It was Walking with Purpose.
I do that one too. We're in our 7th year at my parish. It is life-changing and
it's amazing.
Really beautiful. And yeah, I agree with all your sentiments. But I wanted to put it out there because I'm sure my listeners are like, what is it?
It's so good. Well, I didn't know if I should mention it, but yeah, why not? It's the opening your heart one is just, I want to actually do it over again. But I've since then done maybe 5 or 6. I only do them by myself because I don't have a group near me. But I also teach Blaze to my kids and their middle school friends from the parish. So that's been also just wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I will leave a link in the show notes to it because it has been life-changing, not just for me, but for our parish and a lot of the women in our parish. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, I love what you said about adoration because adoration can be hard for some people. It's hard for me but still. I usually have a journal or I'm like reading something or keeping my mind busy. But there's so much beauty in just like sitting and like you said, not just gazing upon Jesus, but having him gaze upon you and just heal those wounds and be that balm and just kind of hold you in his hands. And I just love all of that. And I do believe that the Eucharist is the medicine that we need and all the sacraments, just pour into us. The sacrament of reconciliation. It's
my favorite. It's my favorite
one. Yeah. And it can be so difficult. It can be very hard for a lot of people who have been Catholic for, their whole life to do it. But when you approach it and you see Jesus just reaching out to you with his love and mercy, it just makes it so much easier. And then just all those graces filling you up. And it just feels like this warm, healing balm just going through our soul. We are so blessed as Catholics to have that.
We are.
So you mentioned to me when we were getting ready for the podcast that you've been diagnosed with complex PTSD as a result of your ongoing childhood trauma. So can you touch on that? Because I've never actually heard of complex PTSD and the difference is between that and just, I don't want to say regular PTSD. But,
I always say regular. I don't know. Or like typical, maybe. I don't know.
There you go.
So it's a little it's newer, maybe in the last 5 years, 6 years or so. I think it just recently got added to the DSM-5 as a full diagnosable condition. But the difference between that and PTSD is that PTSD usually is from one single event. It could be multiple events, but there's isolated events that are, singular. And someone goes through their life and something maybe triggers a memory from that specific event and they can have a flashback. That's usually a hallucinatory flashback. Sometimes it can be emotional where they'll like feel the feelings or body sensations even from that event. And, it takes a lot of therapy to learn how to process those feelings, but also go through life in the midst of them, because they do continue to happen. So that's actually one of the things I do in my office. Is there's a protocol for PTSD that helps interrupt that response. Complex PTSD is when there has been ongoing trauma, usually from childhood. So it's not a specific event, but it's a series of events over time. And so the brain is changed because it's literally learning to survive within a war zone. That's kind of how the brain interprets it, even if it's not like a war zone. If there's ongoing childhood abuse, or even if say a child's growing up in war, that would lead more to complex PTSD versus just, I don't want to belittle PTSD by saying just singular PTSD. And so with the complex PTSD, the symptoms are a little bit different, where I'll just use myself as an example. Like if I have an interaction with someone that they maybe say something and they're not trying to, they'll say something or look at me a certain way, or it's all very subtle. I can revert to what's called an emotional flashback, where I kind of take on the emotions that I was feeling at a moment that the initial incident that made me have those feelings happened. I don't know if that makes sense. So let's say something happened to me when I was 8, and I had like very severe emotions to it. And then I'm, 40, and somebody says something and it triggers that memory somehow subconsciously. And all of a sudden I'm 8. I feel like I'm 8. I can't articulate it. I don't know why I'm lashing out at someone, but I'm in this emotional state of an 8-year-old. And so the more therapy I've done around it, the more like awareness I have, like, oh, I can actually step out and be like, oh, I'm having an emotional flashback right now. Like that's inconvenient. Like I'm driving the kids to school, but so that's helpful to like be aware of it. The difference is that there's no telling how long those flashbacks will last. So I've had them last an hour. Sometimes they can last weeks. Sometimes they can last months. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's really how the brain is assimilating memories. And because the brain doesn't really record time the way that we do, it's thinking that everything's happening at the same time. And its only job is to help me survive. So that emotional flashback is actually serving a purpose, even though it's sort of re-traumatizing me. So as a result, I like to talk about complex PTSD and addictions, because I think that the mechanism of addiction really is our way of maintaining some semblance of normalcy and control. And if we're dealing with any kind of past trauma that's causing these emotional flashbacks, especially if we're not aware that these flashbacks are a thing, the brain chemistry is going to situate itself in a way that we're wanting to use so that we can numb that, because it's scary and it's uncomfortable and we don't know why it's happening. And so the more awareness we bring to it, the more treatment we have for it, the more we can sort of interrupt the synapse and divert it to do something else. Like, hey, let's call someone. Maybe let's pray. Let's go to adoration, like other things that can fill that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that totally makes sense, because it's kind of, it's a spectrum, right? Like you said, it's like you have the complex PTSD, and that makes total sense why it would be called that, because it's like a buildup. It's like an ongoing, and it's a lot different than a specific one event that causes PTSD. So thank you so much for explaining that. I could relate to some of the things that you were saying, and I'm sure that some people in my audience can as well. And it kind of makes me feel like, okay, you're not so like different than everybody else. Like there's other people that experience this. And of course you would turn to a substance or whatever it is to medicate, to cope, to whatever it is. Of course you would do that.
Yes.
But now you're an adult and you need to learn, let's learn some healthier ways, and be kinder to ourselves, and things that align more with our vocation and our moral compass, basically, as well. So Stephanie, can you talk about the challenges that especially mothers face in maintaining appearances while suffering internally, because like I shared with you before we hit record that I've known people for years and years and years, and then something will come out that they have an eating disorder or had an eating
Yeah.
disorder, or maybe they are over drinking or whatever it is,
Hmm.
but they've been able to like hide it so
Yeah.
well that, and I like to think that I'm a pretty observant person, but I, didn't notice it. So can you
Hmm.
speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think in general, mothers are like the vocation lends itself to perfectionism, whether we want to admit it or not. We're always concerned if we're doing a good enough job. I think that's general. I could probably speak for most moms. Are we doing a good enough job? And is enough enough? So for me, I'm measuring myself against my yesterday self at all times, and that in a way is like unachievable because it's like I can't just keep getting better and better and better and striving for this perfection person. But society, I think, kind of I think it puts it in there a little bit to maybe inspire us to do that, but it's like unattainable. So I think moms just kind of go through this mothering life of trying to put on the face and show up as the volunteer. And yes, I can bake the thing. I can show up and bring all the clothes to the drive. I can carpool on the field trip. Yeah, I'll do all that. And they don't give themselves grace to maybe admit that they're dealing with something really horrible inside. So they just push it down. And then when everything's over at the end of the day, they release and they find somewhere quiet and alone, and they use or whatever they're doing in terms of what they're hiding. And so it is difficult to notice it. I actually, knowing myself and what I've hidden, I start to look at other moms at the school drop off, and I'm like, I wonder what she's dealing with today, and I wonder if she's okay. Like it's hard to tell. I would say with eating disorders, um, for me, it's not hard to tell because I can notice all the different signs, even the way somebody looks. But for an outsider, like somebody that's maybe obsessed with their food, or you can sort of see it in the way that they eat. If they're like shoveling things or they're eating like a bird, like those are like little observations. What's the difficult thing is kind of like asking a woman if she's pregnant. We don't want to do that until she's really pregnant and showing, right? So it's hard to confront someone when we suspect that. But I think there's this secret longing of these women that are struggling to just have someone ask them, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And so yeah, I think that's the conundrum. We put on the face and the clothes and we go out into the world and we're there for our kids. We're sacrificial, right? Like that's what we're called to do. And so why should I need help? I should do this on my own. There's a lot of shoulds, and we hide behind that. And um, it is a struggle for women. And I wish that there was less stigma around that stuff.
Yeah, I do too. And I love what you said, because I look at people too, like when they're drinking or when I
Hmm.
over drinking, or maybe whenever I see them, they're I don't know, there's just things that I can tell, but then I'm like, am
Hmm.
I just because I don't drink, or am I just like hypersensitive to it, or am I imparting what I think is happening on them? And so it's true that you can't just go up and be like, I think, you are
Hmm.
drinking a little too much. I see you struggling and this and that. But I find, at least for me, that sharing my
Yes.
struggles and just being like, oh my gosh, like if they're like, do you want to drink? And I'm like, yeah, I left that back in my
Yeah.
20s. It was like
Hmm.
not good. And so I feel like both of us just sharing our stories in
Yes.
whatever natural and organic way that the spirit moves us to share with
Yeah.
someone can be helpful, because that opens a door. And I find that as soon as I open the door, people just like flood in with
They've
like,
fallen.
oh my
Yes.
gosh, yeah, because they feel seen, they feel
Yes.
known, and they
And they
feel
feel
like,
safe.
yeah, yeah, and you get me, and you're not going to judge me because you've been
Right.
there.
Right.
So that's why it's so important that we share our struggles
Yeah.
um, with other people, so that putting on that facade for many, many years. I did. I mean, it was 2 decades that of recovery that I barely
Wow.
ever talked about it.
Yeah.
I would mention it every once in a while. I would joke about it a little bit, but I never really went in depth on it until God was like, girl, you got to get your story out there. Like, people need to hear.
Mm.
And now I like talk about it all the time, like every
I
single
think
day.
I liken it to or my calling of to evangelize, because I
Mhm.
can't separate my experience with God from this story. So every time I
Exactly.
tell this story, I tell my conversion story too, and
Mhm.
I get to talk about Jesus. And people are just, I mean, I live in Western Massachusetts. It's very blue up here, very
Mhm.
liberal, and so there's not a lot of God speak. They just
Yeah.
don't really talk about it. But there's a lot of God hope and God want. I can like feel it. People
Mhm.
are seeking. And so when I get to tell my story, I sort of do a little plug in like, oh, and
Yeah.
by the way, so it's a really great way to, and again, like you said, people feel safe to relate and say, you know what, I've been struggling, or I have a friend that's been struggling. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I say that too. I'm like, my reversion story and my sobriety story are tightly intertwined, because without
Hmm.
or the other, I wouldn't have one or the other. I
Hmm.
know for a fact. And I live in Washington State, just across the border from Portland, Oregon. So I feel you.
Okay.
Like, I know
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying. I'm like
Yeah.
this, I'm trying to be this light in the darkness, but
There's
there
a
is a lot of desire.
There's a line in Carol Houslander's book, The Reed of God, which I love that book. Um, and she talks about being the sweet fragrance of Christ, which I think
Hmm.
is someone else coined that, but she repeated it. And I think to myself, yeah, maybe that's what I'm called to do here, to be the sweet fragrance of Christ to people that are seeking and thirsty.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. I totally believe that. So how do you think that we can better support women who may be struggling in ways? We talked a little bit about sharing our stories, but are there any other ways that you can think of that that either we could recognize maybe, or support somebody that we know is struggling, but maybe they're not ready to fully admit it yet?
Yeah, I think that this might sound redundant because I already talked about it, but if we notice people are struggling, but we also are perceiving that maybe they're not ready to hear it or they don't necessarily want help, that's where I just let go and let God. And in that
Mhm.
sense, I kind of flip the script a little bit, where I'm not talking so much about my bulimia, but I'm just talking about God. And my story really does kind of, I mean, I wasn't always devout. I wasn't always, this Christian that was so in love with Christ. And so I think people can relate to that too, because they just need to hear that. And then they get curious. Oh, well, what books are you reading? And then I give them recommendations. I love books and I love spiritual books, but I also think everybody's personalities are so different. And so some people might love something by Fulton Sheen, and some people might love Chesterton, or like
Mhm.
um, C.S. Lewis. So I try to say, hey, I've read this book. You should check it out. You should check it out. And sometimes I actually hand them the book. I'll get it for them and just, you should read this. I love Lisa Brennick Meyer's Be Still Daily Devotional. I have given that to
Mhm.
so many people, whether they're, you know, Christians or not. I just give that to them. And that has opened so many conversations, and people have shared deep things with me. And they've told me, I've never told anyone this in my life. And so I feel so honored that people are sharing that stuff with me. And so I just sort of let God guide me about what person needs to hear what right now. I don't always just out with the bulimia, because I've done that before, and I think people get whoa, whoa, okay,
That's
they
a
don't
lot.
really I haven't really had that conversation with anyone about that before, but okay. So I just tread lightly and yeah, read the room.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, just kind of let the spirit guide you. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what I try to do too. Cause you're right. When I've tried to make it happen or insert myself, it kind of gets
Yeah.
awkward. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so before we close, I was just hoping that maybe you could give some advice for those women who are presenting themselves one way but are struggling in private. Like, where could they seek help? How can they, they realize that maybe it's becoming a problem, but they're not ready to really like go full force
Hmm.
and get
Hmm.
help or find a 12-step program or whatever. What are some little steps that can lead to bigger steps to try to get them unstuck from that situation?
I think if they're identifying with being an addict at all, it doesn't ever hurt to just read some AA literature. You can find it easily on the internet. You can go to food 12-step food websites and read some of their literature. And I think there was a lot of grace that happened with the COVID years. A lot of not good stuff, but a lot of grace came down. And the Zoom platform has really revamped how 12-step programs have worked.
Mhm.
And yes, there's a lot of in-person meetings, which I think are ideal. But there's a lot of Zoom meetings, especially in the food groups. And so um, you can join in on a meeting and turn off your video if you want and just listen and see if you can relate to anybody. And if you don't, you don't. But at least, the seed was planted there. I really think that other people and hearing their stories is one of the best ways to find support and less isolation. But it's scary. So, of course, that's why I feel like the Zoom platform can be a little bridge to sort of, hey, I'm here, but not really. I'm just getting information, but I don't want to talk to you, like, because that's how we
Yeah.
all feel when we first go to a meeting. We don't want to talk to anybody, and they all want to
Mhm.
talk to us. And it's like, ugh, I don't feel like I want to do that right now. So, Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous is a great 12-step program. There's also Food Addicts in Recovery Anonymous. That's another really good one. And then EDA is Eating Disorders Anonymous. So those are just three of there are several more food-based 12-step groups, but they all have their own literature. They have their own books. You can buy one of the books and just start reading. There are stories in there. You can find which ones maybe relate to you. And slowly and surely, if you just pray for the grace and the willingness to stay open, God will start scrubbing the inside of that heart.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. And you're right. Just like starting to seek, I just feel like I always say God leaves us like these little breadcrumbs to follow. And so, like,
Yeah.
one thing can lead to another thing, can lead to another thing. And so,
Hmm.
and we are so blessed with technology, like you were just mentioning, where we can just just Google
Yeah.
it. Like, if
Right.
you're not sure, Google it.
Right.
Um, get that literature, get that information that I didn't have any access to. And then there's also, I just want to mention, I'm not affiliated with them, but there's Catholic in Recovery, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
all types of
They're great.
yeah, and so they address all different types of disordered attachments and addictions,
Yes,
and they also have groups for those who are family members of those struggling
yes,
as
they
well.
do.
So, and they have a lot of Zoom options and
Yeah.
in-person options as well. So I
And
just wanted
Scott
to put that out
Scott
there.
Weeman's book, The 12 Steps in the Sacraments, is
Yeah,
awesome. The way
it's
that
so good.
he explains how the sacraments um, align with the 12 steps. I don't know if people are aware, but the 12 steps like came from Christianity. No one wants to say that out loud. They're Ignatian spirituality steps. It's the
Yeah.
same thing. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was based off the book of James in the Bible. So there it is. I'm saying it out loud. And
There it is. It's
yeah,
out there for everybody.
yeah,
Yes, I agree. And when I went to AA, that aspect of it, I think, is what kept me coming back and really drew me in, because I did have a pretty solid faith foundation growing up. And so I think for any of us, if we're struggling and maybe fallen away, or, that
hmm,
can really just help pull us back in and connect us to God. So thank you for mentioning that. And I do love that book. He did a great job on that. So,
yeah. He did.
all right, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. And can you just share where people can find out more about you and anything? Just share
Sure.
away anything you want my
Uh,
listeners.
I just right now I just have a website for my practice, but you can always get in touch with me through that. It's www.shineamherst.com, all one word. And then I have a Facebook page that is Shine Acupuncture. And I'm working on other technological advances right now. So to be continued.
Yes. Well, I will put all of that in the show notes. So if you want to get in touch with Stephanie, you can. And I just thank you so much for being here. It's been a blessing to me. And I know that it's going to be so helpful and hopeful for so many women in my audience.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Catholic Sobriety Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I would invite you to share it with a friend who might also get value from it as well. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing. I am the Catholic Sobriety Coach, and if you would like to learn how to work with me or learn more about the coaching that I offer, visit my website, thecatholicsobrietycoach.com. Follow me on Instagram at the Catholic Sobriety Coach. I look forward to speaking to you next time. And remember, I am here for you. I am praying for you. You are not alone.